The
I came as
Winchester's
soon as I
report
heard
echoed
what's
across the
wrong.
Wyoming plains like thunder.
It's about your brother.
75 yards away, a man
He
clutched
just
his
arrived
shoulder
this
and
morning.
tumbled from a stolen palomino. Sawyer Morgan lowered the rifle, its walnut stock worn smooth from years of use. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as he approached the wounded horse thief, spurs jingling with each deliberate step. "That's my property you're bleeding on," Sawyer said, voice as dry as the surrounding badlands. The thief, barely more than a boy, writhed in the dust. "Next time I catch you stealing, the bullet goes 2 inches to the left." The wounded man staggered to his feet, hand pressed against his bloodied shoulder. "You're a dead man, Morgan," he spat, stumbling backward toward his own mount. "Blackwood's boys will hear about this." Sawyer's expression hardened at the mention of Blackwood. The mining baron's influence was spreading like poison through the territory. He watched the thief retreat, then ran a calloused hand along the palomino's neck, checking for injuries. The horse, Lightning, was the only thoroughbred Sawyer owned, and worth more than everything else on his ranch combined. The stallion nuzzled his shoulder, recognizing the man who'd raised him from a colt. "Let's go home, boy," Sawyer murmured, swinging into the saddle with practiced ease. At 38, his body bore the marks of a hard life, a knife scar across his left forearm, a bullet wound in his right thigh, and countless smaller injuries from breaking horses and building fences. But up here, with the reins in his hands and the wind in his face, Sawyer Morgan felt something close to freedom. The 160-acre ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent. Morgan's rest wasn't much. A sturdy two-room cabin, a barn that needed a new roof, a corral for the horses, and grazing land stretching toward distant mountains. What the locals didn't know was the small silver deposit he'd discovered last spring in the northern section. Not enough to make him rich, but sufficient to change his fortunes if worked properly. That night, Sawyer sat alone on his porch, cleaning the Winchester 73 by lantern light. The ritual calmed him, as it had during the war when he'd served as a scout for the Union Army. Each component was inspected, oiled, and reassembled with meticulous care. His thoughts drifted to Shiloh, where he'd guided a Union battalion through swamp and forest, helping them flank Confederate positions. 23 men had followed him that night. Only 11 returned. The memory still haunted his dreams. Beside him, a glass of whiskey remained untouched. The loneliness hit him hardest in these quiet moments. No wife to share his bed, no children to carry his name. Just the wind, the darkness, and memories he couldn't outrun. 2 months earlier, Sawyer had endured another afternoon at the Grey Rock Saloon, weathering the usual barbs about his solitary existence. "Here widower Jenkins got hitched again yesterday," Tom Wilson announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Man's 65 if he's a day. That's 3 wives for Jenkins. And Morgan here can't even find one." The laughter stung more than Sawyer cared to admit. Jim Hayes, the saloon's owner, and the closest thing Sawyer had to a friend, slid another whiskey across the bar. Like Sawyer, Jim had served in the war, losing his left leg at Antietam. The shared experience had forged a bond between them that transcended words. "You ever consider one of those mail-order arrangements?" Jim asked quietly after the others had moved on. "Lots of decent women back east looking for a fresh start." "What woman would want this life?" Sawyer gestured vaguely toward the window. "Isolation, hard work, danger. You've built something here, Sawyer. A man who can build something can find a woman to share it with." That night, Sawyer wrote his first letter, describing himself honestly. Former scout, rancher, a man of few words but steady character. He described the ranch, the small herd of cattle, the newly discovered silver deposit. He mentioned nothing of the war or the nightmares that still plagued him. The response came 6 weeks later from an Eleanor Reed of Boston, a plain-spoken woman by her account, who had spent her life in service to a wealthy family and now sought independence in the West. Her letter was straightforward, practical, lacking flourish or sentimentality, precisely what Sawyer believed he needed. The stagecoach's arrival scattered dust across Grey Rock's main street. Sawyer stood awkwardly beside the station, hat in hand, collar uncomfortably tight against his sun-weathered neck. His Colt 45 hung at his hip, a necessity rather than a choice in these parts. The door swung open, and Sawyer's carefully constructed expectations shattered like glass. The woman who emerged was tall and elegant, her auburn hair swept beneath a fashionable hat that probably cost more than his monthly earnings. Her traveling dress, though dusty from the journey, was clearly expensive, emerald silk that caught the sunlight as she moved. Even her posture spoke of privilege, of a lifetime spent in drawing rooms rather than kitchens. This couldn't possibly be Eleanor Reed. When their eyes met, Sawyer saw the same recognition flash across her face, the realization that something was terribly wrong. The woman glanced anxiously at a letter in her gloved hand, then back at him. "Mr. Morgan?" she asked, her accent refined, nothing like the plain-spoken tone of Eleanor Reed's letters. "That's me," Sawyer replied, his suspicion evident. "And you would be—" "Eleanor Reed," she said, extending her hand. The lie hung between them like smoke. "No," Sawyer replied flatly. "You're not." The woman's composure fractured momentarily before she recovered, glancing nervously over her shoulder at the departing stagecoach. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private?" Before Sawyer could respond, his attention shifted to the ridge beyond town. 3 riders appeared on the horizon, moving with purpose toward Grey Rock. The woman followed his gaze, and Sawyer watched the color drain from her face. "Please," she whispered, genuine fear replacing her carefully maintained dignity. "I can explain everything, but not here. Not now." Something in her expression, raw desperation beneath the refined exterior, made Sawyer pause. Against his better judgment, he nodded toward his horse. "Can you ride?" "Yes." "Then let's go." They rode hard for the ranch, the woman handling the borrowed mare with unexpected skill. Halfway home, Sawyer veered off the main trail, cutting through a rocky draw that would hide their tracks. He glanced back frequently, watching for pursuit. When they finally reached Morgan's Rest, Sawyer dismounted and secured the horses without a word. The woman stood uncertainly in the yard, looking simultaneously out of place and oddly determined. And inside the cabin, Sawyer poured 2 cups of coffee and set one before her. "Start talking," he said, the Colt conspicuously visible on his hip. "Who are you, and why are those men following you?" The woman's fingers trembled slightly as she removed her gloves. "My name is Victoria Harrington. My father is Cornelius Harrington of the Boston Mercantile Bank." She paused, gauging his reaction. "That means nothing to me," Sawyer replied truthfully. 3 weeks ago, I was meant to marry Charles Blackwood, a mining magnate from Colorado. The union would have secured my father's investments in Blackwood's operations. She spoke clinically, as if discussing a business transaction rather than her own life. 2 days before the wedding, I discovered something disturbing. Sawyer stiffened at the name. "Blackwood? The same Blackwood who's been buying up mining claims across the territory?" Victoria nodded. "The very same. His operations extend from Colorado to Montana now." "I've heard stories," Sawyer said grimly. "None of them good. Blackwood's first wife didn't die in an accident, as everyone believes. I found evidence suggesting he murdered her when she threatened to leave him." Victoria's voice remained steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. "When I confronted my father, he dismissed my concerns. The financial arrangements were too important to abandon over what he called unsubstantiated rumors." Victoria reached for the high collar of her dress, withdrawing a diamond necklace that caught the afternoon light like captured fire. "This was my mother's. My father intended it as a gift to Blackwood, collateral for a substantial loan. I took it and fled. And the men following us? Montgomery Fletcher, my father's lawyer, and two hired men. They've been pursuing me across 3 territories. Sawyer studied her face, looking for deception. Why come here? Why the elaborate ruse with the letters? I needed to disappear somewhere no one would think to look. A mail-order bride traveling to a remote ranch in Wyoming seemed perfect. Victoria held his gaze. I'm sorry for the deception, Mr. Morgan, but I was desperate. Before Sawyer could respond, his instincts prickled. Moving to the window, he spotted a cloud of dust approaching from the east. Riders, at least 3, moving fast. They're coming, he said grimly, reaching for the Winchester. Get away from the windows. Victoria's hand disappeared into the folds of her dress, emerging with a small derringer. I'm not entirely helpless, Mr. Morgan. Sawyer raised an eyebrow but said nothing, mentally reassessing the woman before him. He moved efficiently around the cabin, checking ammunition, securing doors, and positioning himself with a clear view of the approaching riders. The men reined in about 50 yards from the house. The leader, a thin, severe-looking man in an expensive suit, dismounted and approached alone, hands conspicuously visible. Miss Harrington, he called, this charade has gone far enough. Your father is most concerned for your welfare. Sawyer stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. The lady doesn't seem interested in speaking with you. The man, Fletcher presumably, offered a tight smile that never reached his eyes. This doesn't concern you, sir. Victoria Harrington is engaged to be married. Her father has authorized me to return her to Boston immediately. Seems to me a grown woman can decide for herself where she wants to be. Fletcher's smile vanished. Miss Harrington has taken property that doesn't belong to her, a family heirloom of considerable value. That makes this a legal matter. Victoria appeared beside Sawyer, the derringer hidden within the folds of her skirt. The necklace was my mother's, Mr. Fletcher. Left specifically to me in her will. My father has no claim to it. Your father's patience is wearing thin, Miss Harrington. Charles Blackwood is not a man accustomed to disappointment. Return with us now, and we can resolve this matter privately. Victoria's hand tightened on her hidden weapon. I know what happened to Blackwood's first wife. I have evidence. Something dangerous flickered across Fletcher's face. He glanced at his companions, who had shifted positions to flank the house. Sawyer noted the movement, his body tensing in response. This is your final opportunity to come willingly, Fletcher said, his tone hardening. Otherwise, we'll be forced to take more direct action. Victoria stepped forward, and before Sawyer could stop her, she raised the derringer and fired a warning shot that kicked up dust near Fletcher's horse. The animal reared in panic, nearly throwing its rider. The next one won't miss, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Fletcher's face contorted with rage. He signaled to his men, who immediately drew their weapons. What followed was chaos. Sawyer fired the Winchester twice in rapid succession, dropping one man from his saddle and forcing another to seek cover behind a water trough. Fletcher retreated behind his spooked horse, drawing a revolver. Bullets splintered wood around them as Sawyer pulled Victoria back into the cabin. He positioned himself at the window, firing methodically, forcing the attackers to keep their distance. Can you reload? He asked, passing Victoria a box of ammunition. She nodded, handling the cartridges with surprising competence. My grandfather taught me to shoot when I was 12. My father never knew. A bullet shattered the window above them, showering glass across the floor. Sawyer returned fire, satisfied to hear a cry of pain from outside. We can't stay here, he said, assessing their limited options. They'll circle around to the back soon enough. Victoria's face was pale but determined. What do you suggest? Sawyer considered their situation, 2 against at least 2 remaining attackers, with limited ammunition and no reinforcements coming. The odds weren't good. There's an old mining tunnel about half a mile north, he said finally. Connects to a ravine on the other side of the ridge. If we can reach it, we might lose them in the hills. Victoria nodded, gathering her skirts. Lead the way, Mr. Morgan. They slipped out the back door during a lull in the gunfire, keeping low as they made their way toward the tree line. Behind them, smoke began to rise from the cabin. Fletcher and his remaining man had set fire to the structure, likely hoping to flush them out. Everything I own is in that cabin, Sawyer said grimly, watching flames engulf his home of 8 years. Victoria touched his arm briefly. I'm sorry I brought this to your door. Save your breath for running, he replied, though the gesture didn't go unnoticed. They reached the tunnel entrance as shouts indicated their escape had been discovered. The dark passage beckoned, a tight, claustrophobic space that Sawyer had discovered while exploring his property. The silver deposit lay deeper within the mountain, but this particular tunnel served their immediate need for escape. It's narrow, he warned, lighting a small lantern he'd grabbed before fleeing, and not entirely stable. Victoria hitched up her impractical skirts. After you, Mr. Morgan. The tunnel journey was harrowing, tight passages where they had to crawl, rotting support beams that groaned ominously overhead, in the constant fear of pursuit. Twice they stopped to listen, hearing distant shouts echo through the mountain. They won't follow us in here, Sawyer said, more to reassure himself than Victoria. Too dangerous for anyone who doesn't know the way. When they finally emerged on the other side, daylight was fading. The ravine stretched before them, offering a route toward Gray Rock if they could navigate its rocky terrain in the growing darkness. We need to reach Jim Hayes, Sawyer decided, helping Victoria down a steep incline. He's the only person in town I trust. Victoria nodded, her earlier composure giving way to exhaustion. The elegant clothes that had marked her as an outsider were now torn and filthy, her hair falling loose around dust-streaked features. Somehow the dishevelment made her seem more real to Sawyer, less a vision of unattainable refinement and more a woman of flesh and blood. They traveled through the night, avoiding the main trail, moving by starlight across terrain Sawyer knew intimately from his scouting days. By dawn, they reached the outskirts of Gray Rock, approaching Jim's saloon from the rear to avoid being seen. Jim's surprised expression quickly turned to concern as he ushered them into his private quarters above the saloon. Jesus, Sawyer, you look like hell. And this would be? Victoria Harrington, Sawyer replied, accepting the whiskey Jim offered. Not Eleanor Reed. I gathered that much. What kind of trouble are you in? Sawyer explained their situation while Victoria cleaned herself up using a basin Jim provided. The old bartender listened without interruption, his weathered face growing increasingly grave. Blackwood, he said finally, shaking his head. Charles Blackwood of the Rocky Mountain Mining Company? Victoria emerged from behind the privacy screen, wearing clean clothes borrowed from Jim's late wife. You know him? Everyone in these parts knows Blackwood. Jim's expression darkened. Speak of the devil. He gestured toward the window. Below in Gray Rock's main street, a group of riders had just arrived. At their center rode a massive man with a scarred face. Charles Blackwood himself, unmistakable even from a distance. That's him, Victoria whispered, her face paling. Sawyer studied the man from the window. Even from this distance, Blackwood's presence commanded attention. Standing a head taller than most of his men, with broad shoulders and a jagged scar running from temple to jaw, he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to having his way. The townsfolk visibly shrank from his path as he dismounted and strode toward the sheriff's office. Man's got a reputation that would make the devil blush, Jim continued quietly. Broke a miners' strike last year by having the leader shot. Controls half the territorial legislature through bribes and blackmail. And he wants to marry me, Victoria said bitterly, for my father's banking connections. What evidence do you have about his first wife? Sawyer asked. Victoria's hand went to her throat, where the diamond necklace remained hidden. It's in here, she explained, removing the piece. The central stone is hollow. Inside is a letter from Catherine Blackwood to her sister, written the day before she died. She feared for her life and documented Charles's threats. Jim whistled softly. No wonder they're hunting you so hard. That kind of evidence could hang a man, even one as powerful as Blackwood. The problem, Sawyer interjected, is getting that evidence to someone who can actually do something about it. The local law won't touch Blackwood. Federal marshals might, Jim suggested. Territorial murder falls under their jurisdiction. Victoria's expression brightened momentarily before darkening again. But we'd need to contact them without alerting Blackwood or my father's men, and they're surely watching the telegraph office. The conversation halted abruptly as boots thudded on the stairs outside. Jim moved to the door, pistol drawn, relaxing only when a familiar voice called his name. It's Cooper, Jim explained, opening the door to admit a tall, powerfully built black man with a blacksmith's muscled arms and watchful eyes. Riders in town, Cooper reported without preamble. At least 10 men, led by Blackwood himself. They're offering $500 for information about a woman matching her description. He nodded toward Victoria. Sawyer's mind raced. 10 men was more than they could handle, even with Jim and Cooper's help. They needed a plan, something unexpected that would give them an edge against superior numbers. The bank, he said suddenly. Blackwood's connection to your father is financial. What if there's evidence of their dealings at the Grey Rock Bank? Victoria considered this. My father wouldn't keep records of anything truly damning, but Blackwood might be less careful. If we could access the bank's records, Andrew Parker, Jim suggested, the bank's lawyer, he's no friend of Blackwood's, lost some mining claims to him in a questionable court decision last year. Can we trust him? Sawyer asked. More than most in this town. A plan began to form, dangerous with slim odds of success, but better than waiting for Blackwood to find them. While Jim sent for Parker, Cooper offered additional intelligence about Blackwood's men and their positions around town. By midday, their small alliance had expanded to include Parker, a sharp-minded elderly lawyer with a personal grudge against Blackwood, and a strategy had taken shape. Victoria would create a diversion at the hotel, pretending to be a stranded traveler seeking accommodation, drawing attention while Sawyer and Parker accessed the bank records through the lawyer's legitimate connections. As they finalized details, Parker revealed an unexpected asset. I've been experimenting with Edison's new phonograph, the elderly lawyer explained, showing them a miniaturized recording device, smaller than the commercial models, designed for field use by reporters. Records sound on wax cylinders. Victoria examined the device with interest. Could this record a conversation without the speaker knowing? Parker nodded, a sly smile crossing his weathered face. That's precisely what I had in mind, Miss Harrington. If we could get Blackwood to incriminate himself, Sawyer began. Exactly, Parker confirmed. Recorded evidence would be admissible in federal court. With this new possibility in mind, they refined their strategy. Parker would arrange an apparent business meeting with Blackwood, wearing the recording device. Meanwhile, Sawyer and Victoria would access the bank records, seeking documentary evidence of Blackwood's crimes. It's too risky, Sawyer argued when Victoria insisted on accompanying him. Blackwood has seen you. His men will recognize you immediately. Victoria smiled thinly. You'd be surprised how differently men see a woman when her appearance changes. With Jim's late wife's clothes and Cooper's assistance in staining her hair darker with coffee grounds, Victoria transformed herself from a Boston socialite to a plain-spoken frontier woman. The plan proceeded with tense precision until an unexpected complication arose. Blackwood himself spotted Sawyer crossing the street toward the bank. What followed was a frantic chase through Gray Rock's back alleys, with Sawyer narrowly evading capture by hiding in Cooper's smithy. Meanwhile, Victoria and Parker successfully accessed the bank records, discovering evidence of Blackwood's widespread corruption, illegal land seizures documented through forged deeds, blackmail payments recorded as consulting fees, and most damning, a substantial payment to the local coroner following his wife's death. When they reconvened at Jim's saloon, their triumph was short-lived. Cooper arrived with grave news. Blackwood had taken Jim hostage, demanding Victoria in exchange for the old bartender's life. "I'll go," Victoria said immediately. "Jim risked everything for us." "That's exactly what Blackwood expects," Sawyer countered. "He'll kill you both." The final confrontation took place at an abandoned warehouse outside town. Sawyer approached openly, apparently bringing Victoria as demanded. Cooper and Parker circled around to create a distraction from the rear. "Mr. Blackwood," Victoria called as they entered the dimly lit space. "I believe you've been looking for me." Charles Blackwood stepped forward, a massive figure with cold eyes and that distinctive scar. Jim knelt beside him, bloodied but alive, a gun pressed to his head. "Miss Harrington," Blackwood's voice was surprisingly cultured, "you've led us on quite a chase." "It's over now," Victoria replied. "Release Mr. Hayes, and I'll come with you." Blackwood smiled without warmth. "I'm afraid the situation has become more complicated. Your little investigation at the bank has created inconveniences." "We have evidence of everything," Sawyer interjected. "Your wife's murder, the bribery. All of it's been sent to the federal marshal in Cheyenne." Blackwood's smile didn't waver. "You're bluffing, Mr. Morgan. The telegraph lines have been cut since this morning." "We didn't use the telegraph," Victoria said, producing Parker's small recording device from her pocket. "We use this, and your confession right now is being recorded for the authorities." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blackwood's face. "What exactly do you think you have on me, Miss Harrington?" "I know you murdered Catherine," Victoria replied steadily. "You pushed her from that balcony when she threatened to expose your illegal land seizures." "You can't prove that," Blackwood snarled, but his composure was cracking. "Can I? Your payment to Coroner Mills is documented in the bank records. $5,000 the day after Catherine's death. An expensive bribe, Mr. Blackwood. But then, murder charges are serious business." It was the opening Sawyer needed. As Blackwood's attention fixed on Victoria and the recording device, Sawyer signaled to Cooper, who had positioned himself behind stacked crates. The gunfight erupted with deafening violence. Sawyer dove for cover as Blackwood's men opened fire, managing to drag Jim to safety behind a stack of crates. Cooper's distraction, a wagon aflame, crashed through the rear wall, creating chaos that allowed Parker to pick off two of Blackwood's men with surprising accuracy for a man his age. Through the smoke and confusion, Sawyer spotted Blackwood escaping toward the door. Despite a bullet grazing his shoulder, Sawyer pursued, determined not to let the man who had destroyed his home and threatened his friends escape justice. Their final confrontation occurred in the dusty street outside, two men facing each other as in countless Western showdowns. Blackwood drew first, his shot going wide. Sawyer's response was deliberate, calculated, finding its mark with the same precision that had made him a feared scout during the war. Blackwood fell, his expression one of genuine surprise as his life ebbed away in the Wyoming dust. 3 weeks later, Sawyer surveyed the reconstruction of his cabin. The roof was nearly complete, the walls standing firm against the autumn wind. Beside him, Victoria, still in Gray Rock despite her father's increasingly desperate telegrams, handed him a cup of coffee. "The federal marshal says they've arrested Fletcher," she reported. "He's cooperating in exchange for leniency. My father's banking practices are under investigation." Sawyer nodded, taking the coffee gratefully. His wounded shoulder was healing slowly, a reminder of how close he'd come to dying in that dusty street. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Return to Boston." Victoria considered the horizon, where storm clouds gathered over distant mountains. The diamond necklace, her mother's legacy, had been sold to finance the rebuilt cabin and new mining equipment. Her fine dresses had been replaced by practical frontier clothing that somehow suited her better. "Boston has nothing for me now," she said finally, "but I hear Wyoming needs school teachers. And this particular corner of Wyoming has promising silver deposits that require proper management." Sawyer raised an eyebrow. "Are you proposing a business partnership, Miss Harrington?" "Perhaps," she replied, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. "For now." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the approaching storm. Neither mentioned the growing warmth between them, the mutual respect forged in danger, the tentative trust built through shared hardship. Those conversations would come later. For now it was enough that they had survived, that they had found in each other's company something neither had expected when fate brought a runaway bride to a lonesome marksman's door. In the distance, lightning split the darkening sky, promising rain for the drought-parched land, and with it, perhaps, new beginnings. 6 months later, Morgan's Rest had transformed. The silver mine operated with modest but steady production. The cattle herd had grown to 60 head. The cabin was now a proper house, with glass windows and a stone chimney. And if the locals noticed that the former Boston socialite seemed perfectly content in her role as business partner to the taciturn rancher, they were wise enough not to comment directly. Jim Hayes had fully recovered, his saloon now prospering with the increased traffic from the mine. Cooper had expanded his smithy to service the mining equipment. Parker had been appointed a territorial judge, using his position to bring fairness to land claim disputes. As winter gave way to spring, Sawyer and Victoria sat on their new porch, reviewing ledgers from the mine. Their quiet evening was interrupted by a rider approaching at speed, one of their workers from town. "Mr. Morgan," the man called, reining in his lathered horse. "Trouble coming. The James Younger gang was spotted crossing into the territory yesterday. Word is they're heading for Grey Rock Bank." Victoria's eyes met Sawyer's, both recognizing what this meant. The notorious outlaws had chosen their town as their next target. Sawyer rose, his hand instinctively checking his Colt. "Seems our peaceful days are numbered." Victoria stood beside him, her expression resolute. "I didn't travel halfway across the country and face down a murderer just to let a gang of outlaws destroy what we built." As the rider departed to spread the warning, Sawyer watched Victoria move with practiced efficiency, checking their rifle cabinet and ammunition stores. She caught him watching and raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Just thinking," he said with the hint of a smile, "that for a mail-order bride who never arrived, you've certainly made yourself at home." Victoria's laughter, rare and genuine, carried across the Wyoming plains as they prepared to defend their hard-won peace from the new threat riding toward them. The story of the marksman and his unexpected partner was far from over.